All right, so the recording has started, so let's begin. So good afternoon, and today is our last session. And so far we have looked at various services. We have started with understanding with kind of AWS infrastructure. So I will just share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Yes. So we have looked at many services from AWS. So it has been journey, and this journey will continue further. So even after this session, you need to explore a lot of things on your own, because each and every topic is itself is a big subject. So you can just go on EC2 for a pretty long period. You can look at Lambda, look at API gateway, and so on. So we will continue further, and we have looked at compute services, EC2. We looked at Lambda, Elastic Beanstalk. We also looked at ECS, which is Elastic Container Service. And we looked at storage. We understood the concept of S3. Then we understood the conceptual EFS. I'll quickly review EFS. And we also looked at database like RDS. DynamoDB as another database, which is NoSQL database. And we have been working with IAM. So today we will actually continue our journey on looking at a couple of more topics. So we also looked at VPC. So we also looked at API gateway. And if you look at all these kind of topics or the services, many services are there. So when you work on AWS, it is very important to really have your application architecture in place. So we will talk about some of the architecture best practices. Then your application needs to be kind of working in multiple regions if required. How do you take care of DR? So we will understand those concepts. What is this RTO or what is this RPO, and how the infrastructure is set up to cater to those requirements. So we have been looking at various services, and one of the services which we started looking at is CloudFormation. So let's proceed further with CloudFormation, and then we'll move on to other topics later. All right. So we yesterday saw what is the benefit of CloudFormation. Then what is the mechanism. So what you do is you basically create something as template file, which is JSON or YML compliant, and you just submit it to CloudFormation. It is free service. CloudFormation tool is a tool. So if you look at the AWS philosophy, what AWS is saying, we are going to give you all the tools free, but all the services which are launched or resources which are launched by that specific tool, we are going to charge for it. Okay. So if the CloudFormation is going to create EC2, then you have to pay for EC2 and so on. So yesterday we saw how to create a bucket, and we are looking at another template. And if you look at this particular template, this is a VPC template. And let's execute that. And you will realize that whatever components which you have created for VPC during VPC creation process, all those things can be quickly created. So this is my template. And this is going to create all the resources. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my console and go to CloudFormation. So this file is there in the demo section. So I will just go to my CloudFormation. And there are many stacks in my case. So what I can do, I can basically go to create stack. I say with new resources. My template is ready. I can upload the template to S3 URL, or I can use the existing S3 URL as well. Choose file. This is my template. And I can view this in the designer. I think we have seen the designer briefly yesterday. So it gives you some UI. So it is a bit cumbersome to really use this, but at least it will give you some insight into what are the resources created by this template. So it shows you some internet gateway here. Then if I just scroll up, it is going to create an EC2 instance. It is going to create route table and so on. Fine, so I have done that. I'm just going to close this. Somehow I need to do that again. Click on next. And you can specify the stack name. Sorry, I picked up something else. I have to choose the VPC. Okay. And I can specify my stack name. So I'm going to say Amod JD stack. And parameters. Now this is a parameter section. Now remember, now this is something which is I'm asking user to give the image ID. Now depending on the region, the AMI ID might be different. Okay. So what I need to do, I need to go to my images and go to EC2 and find out image ID. So I can go to AMIs or I can go to launch instance. And when I launch instance, I basically select the AMI. And you will see an AMI ID long identifier here. I'm going to copy this and paste it over here. Now this is something which I'm asking user to provide the parameters. Other possibilities that you can also restrict users to only select certain images. So you can just give them option of only 3 or 4. I just specify that. And then I'm going to click on next and I'm going to create it. Okay. So I say next. I say create stack. Now the creation has kind of progressed. It is in progress. See, if you look at this now, I got an error. In your case, it might work. Now, if you look at this, it has create as failed. So what it's saying, the maximum number of internet gateways has been reached. Because there is a limit of number of VPCs which you can create, the number of internet gateways you can create. And by default, you can create only 5 VPCs per region per account. So this is something which is problematic. So in that case, what you should do, you have to really contact AWS because VPC limit is a soft limit. You can increase that limit. Provided you increase that limit, then you can rerun this CloudFormation template and it will create all the resources. Now in this case, what I will do, I'm going to switch to another region because I have to delete some VPCs from this region. So just for demonstration purpose, I can switch to another region. And if you notice that here, it has rolled back. And if you remember our VPC elements and template, there are a lot many elements. So it is basically is going to roll back completely. So it is not going to say that I have created only one resource and I'm not going to create another. So it is not going to keep in a limbo state or kind of zombie state. So it is going to be complete rollback. So I can really do this in another region also. Alternatively, I can delete my VPCs from this region. So let me switch to another region. I will switch to North Virginia. And there are many stacks are there. So I'm going to say create stack. Template is ready. I have to upload a template. Choose file. So give a name, Amod, JD, workshop, and image ID. Now I have copied that image ID earlier. So can I use the same image ID or I have to use different image ID? It's a question for you.
Different image ID.
Yeah, why different?
Different region.
Correct. So different region, different AMI IDs. So that is something which you should remember. If anyone has actually worked on any other cloud platform like Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud Platform, they will also find some differences or similarities with this. Especially with Google, the AMI is not region specific. So that is something which you can straight away use. So you don't have to really worry about whether that is there in that region or not. So I'm just going to go to North Virginia. And I'm going to copy that particular AMI ID. So I will just search on Linux. Quick start. Linux 2. So there is an AMI ID. So I'm going to use this AMI ID. So just click on next. Create stack. So depending on whether all the configurations are correct, it is going to succeed or it is going to roll back. See, in my North Virginia region, I have increased the limit of number of VPCs. So in the North Virginia, I can create up to 30 VPCs because that is something which I wanted, because in workshops, a lot of people actually create VPCs. So in case somebody want to share the account, then that is something which is very handy. Look at this, so create is complete. The route table is created, gateway to internet is created, VPC is created. And if I look at my outputs, resources, I should see some elements. So this is my VPC ID. So I will just go to VPC ID. And this is the VPC which is created. And it has got subnets. I can just search on this VPC. route tables, internet gateway. So all the elements are actually created within this VPC. And if you realize that this is something which is created by this CloudFormation, and you can see a tag being added here, CloudFormation logical ID. And it is very quick, isn't it? So in a span of like, few seconds, you just created the VPC. You could create entire infrastructure which we created so far in maybe around less than 5 minutes. Creating RDS, creating load balancer, creating auto scaling. That is just the execution, but obviously you have to craft that template, and the template creation will take some time. So if you are very new to CloudFormation, then it might take days, but if somebody is familiar, they can do it fairly quickly. So that is the benefit of this CloudFormation, and you can keep this CloudFormation in, let's say, source control and so on. All right, so that is one key kind of thing. And if I can basically go to the stacks resources here, and if I have to delete or update, I can do that as well. So if I go to CloudFormation, I'm in North Virginia region. So this is my stack. Parameters I can see, template and so on. And it is also possible to actually update this stack. Let's say you want to modify some security group. So that is also possible. So you can basically want to add, let's say, one more security group, or you want to add one more tag. Then you can specify only that element in the template and upload it, and it is going to pick up all the changes. So you can come here, introduce some additional elements. Suppose if you want to create one more subnet, then you can modify this. And just for illustration purpose, I can say I can basically say something like this. And I say public subnet 2, and this is going to be my another subnet 1.024, and I'm going to say public 2, something like that. And then you can also pick up some additional elements, because it has to be accurate. If something goes wrong or you don't specify correctly, it is not going to work. So what else is there? So I'm just going to use this public subnet route association. So I'm going to repeat this one. I have not tested this particular configuration, but I'm just showing you the process. Public subnet 2, and it is going to use the public route table. I'm going to share my route table. So assuming everything is fine, then I should be able to upload this file. I say replace current template, upload a template file, choose file, click on next. So in case there is an issue, then it is going to throw an error. So there is some issue in this particular. I think there is a typo. So public subnet. It is saying public subnet 2 is not there, something like that. So what is there is a typo here. I need to fix it. And then I have to upload this file again. So I will come back here. I'm just going to replace the current template, choose file. Click on next. So it has picked up some AIM ID. Next. Next. And what I want to highlight is that if you look at this particular concept, which is called change set. So what has happened is that it has detected some change. Our template is modified. So CloudFormation is going to tell you that these are the changes. So whenever you are working with CloudFormation, you have to be very careful, because what is the impact of this change? Is it going to create new resources? Is it going to update the existing resources? If it is going to update the existing resources, is there going to be interruption? So that is something which you need to really understand, and this concept is very important. It's called change set. So unless you are really comfortable with change set, do not proceed. And that is why basically we have this view change set, and it is basically giving you some information about change. So this is something resource type. It is going to add subnet association. If it is replacement, you will see replacement here. Something will appear over there. This is my template, JSON changes. It has also detected JSON changes. So it has detected, what I modified. So this is something which is very handy. And before you execute this, ensure that you're comfortable with this. I say looks good, then I'm going to execute this one. Depending on how good this is, update is in progress. So this is very handy when you are actually working with large kind of systems, and if you don't have automation in place, then it is going to be very challenging. So it is update is happening. So creation in progress. You can see that this is getting created. Refresh this one. So it takes a little bit of time. It is not, it's like that does not happen in seconds. It will take time depending on the resource which is created. So update complete. And if I look at my resources, I should see some resources over there. So what we created public subnet 2. So let's see. So I will go to my VPC and let's see whether it has created any public subnet 2 or not. So if you look at this one, this subnet is created by CloudFormation, and you will see this value public 2 and public subnet 2. So this is nothing but your logical ID. So this is the way you work with CloudFormation template. And if you notice that, we have not looked at our EC2 instance, right? So let's see whether EC2 instance is running or not. So if I go to my EC2 instance, and this is running. So there is not much. This is just a launch the instance. That is something which is very handy. So let me add one more tag here. So I'm just going to say tag, new tag. I say save. And what I do, I will also add some security group. Okay, so let me create some security group. I'm going to change. So okay, there is only one. So I'm going to okay. So I'll just modify this security group. Let's say. Let me create one. So test mode change stack outside template. Let's see whether it works or not. I'm just going to create security group. So what typically happens when you create the resources and then you modify your resources directly from AWS console. So that generally happens, when you are actually fighting against the timeline deadline. Some companies do that, but it is not recommended. So I'm just going to add some rules. I'm going to add rule. I say all traffic. Anywhere, save rules. Now this stack is getting modified. The stack is modified, and I'm going to also modify some VPC settings. Let's say I will go to my VPC, which is here. So let me go back to VPC. So what I'm doing, I'm basically playing with my stack, which is created by CloudFormation. Then how do you detect these things? So now this actual stack is actually deviating from the CloudFormation template. So I'm just going to say add edit tags, create tag. I think we added this tag, right? New tag. Save it. I go to subnet. I do some modification. Here is here route table. All right. So this is the route table which is created. And let's say I modify this route table. So I say edit routes. I remove this association. So somebody had done changes to your CloudFormation stack or the resources which are created by stack. Let's see what happens in the CloudFormation template now. So this is my CloudFormation stack. So I will just go to this stack. Let's see. All right. So now what has happened is that we have modified our resources. So how do you detect? Now this is drifted. So this is called drifting. So our actual resources are different than what is created by this template. So there is one feature which is called drifting or drift check. So I'm just going to say detect drift. So what is happening is that it is detecting the drift. So let's see what is going to happen. If I go to my drifts, see there is a drift section here. And if I look at my drift, it says drifted. It means it has deviated from whatever is there in the template. Now this is very interesting feature. See, it has, because this drift detection may not include all the kind of changes, because now I think AWS documents what changes it can detect. But you will see it has detected some changes on VPC. Something is modified. Public instance in sync, public route table is in sync. And only resources which currently support drift detection are displayed here. So that is something which you need to really understand. It is not complete picture. I say view drift details. See what it has detected. It has detected that I added some tags. So I basically added some tags over here, new tag here. So this is something which is very interesting. So you can really understand, what is happening with your actual resources and so on. But as of now, remember, unfortunately, it does not detect all the changes. So you can't really completely rely on this. So as a practice, you should avoid doing any changes to resources directly from AWS console if you are using CloudFormation. Otherwise, you will have a difficult time in understanding what is going on. So like some companies, I know one company that company, what they do, if anything is kind of manually kind of created, then anyway they can delete it, and they follow a very strict naming convention. If they find any resource which is not following the naming convention, so some tagging mechanism, they straight away delete it, and they do it in the production account, not in dev account or test account. So it is up to your company and how you want to really run this. So that is the concept of detection. All right. So drifts has happened. All right. So that's basically about drifts. So create stack, update stack, and then also it is possible to delete the stack. So you can select the stack, you can delete it, and the stack will be kind of gone. So all the resources which are created will be gone. So if you look at this one, there are a lot many resources. I can just delete the stack. So it is going to delete all the resources which are there. Now this is we are working with single stack, but there might be some requirement of working with multiple stacks. So let's look at working with multiple stacks, or working with multiple templates and stacks. See, when you actually work with AWS, then you will realize that whatever we are creating in the AWS, sometimes this can happen. In the sense, there are two stacks. So in this case, there are two templates to be precise. So what is happening is that now there is a stack A and there is a stack B. And what I want to do, I want to use this particular stack, or this stack is basically my network stack. So using the one template, I basically create the network stack. And I'm going to say that use this public subnet and use this security group. So there is going to be another stack. So I want to create one more stack B for launching an EC2 instance. So what I typically do is that you will separate a VPC layer in one template. You will separate VPC like RDS in another template. But in case if you want to pass some information from one stack to another stack, because subnet ID is something which is dynamic, so you can't really hard code in your another kind of template. So what is happening over here is that there is a feature called export and import. So you can export kind of values which are dynamically generated, or any specific values also, in output section of a template. So in this case, obviously this has some many elements, but you say that export this with name, and this is the function substitute is basically is going to substitute this value. So it is basically just going to use this values AWS stack name subnet ID. And this $AWS stack name is nothing but a stack name which we provide while creating the stack. So this is going to be outputted, exported, and another stack which wants to use that subnet is going to say, I want to create this web server instance. This is my EC2 instance. And then properties T2 micro image ID is so and so. Network interfaces. Yes, network interface. I want to use some security group ID and subnet ID is over here. Function import value, function network stack parameter subnet ID. So this value will be actually used over here. So this is called exporting a value from one stack and importing in another stack. So whenever you want to really work with this, that is something which is very useful. And I have uploaded one template file in the workshop project in the GitHub also. So there is a sample web app cross template. So what basically it does, it creates a set of resources and it exports some values. So it's nothing but it is creating the same kind of VPC. So it is exporting these values. And there is one more template which is going to use this, which is called sample web app cross stack template. And it is going to use import value. So this is something which is already there on the GitHub also. So I'll just show you my GitHub. So under CF, so these are two templates. So you have to first execute this sample network cross stack and then the another one. So this is something which you can try. So it's nothing is very simple. You have to just execute this. And this is going to create one stack, and that stack name you have to pass while executing this particular template. And then once you do that, then in the cloud formation, you will see an export section. Now I might have deleted a few things here. And you should see all the kind of exported values over here. So this is something which you can do. So I will switch to like Mumbai region. So what happens in the cloud formation, there is the export section. And whatever the values are exported are shown. So in this case, see JD demo. So all the values which I'm exporting, those are actually shown here. And when you click on this, you will see if there is any stack which is importing this, then you will see that stack as well. But right now it is not imported by any stack, any other stack. So that is something which you can really use. And the point to be noted is that if another stack imports an output value, then you cannot delete the stack that is exporting the output value, cannot modify the exported output value unless all the dependent objects are actually removed. So if you go back to here and if you try to delete this stack, the stack you cannot delete because somebody is dependent on it. So that is something which is a constraint which you should be aware. So that is one example of using multiple templates. And there is one more case which is called nested stack. So what happens in the nested stack? Let's take a, what is the kind of rationale for this? So if you look at this particular logical template, this is, so let's say you are creating, you have created two templates. One is for website 1, another is for website 2. So we are saying that in this website 1, I need load balancer, auto scaling group, and then Amazon RDS. Website 2 says, I also need load balancer, I also need the auto scaling group. And both these configurations are same. Of course, you can parameterize it. But what you can say, now instead of actually repeating this again every time in these two particular websites, so why can't we reuse it? Why can't we reuse some common things? So what happens, you can create one more template, which is like front end. You can put all the common resources over here. And then you can create additional template. And using a nested stack element of CloudFormation, you can just include this in this. So when this gets executed, then you don't have to really, maintain multiple kind of stacks. So when you execute it, it is going to import all the things which are there and it's going to execute further. So that is the benefit of this nested stack. So you can have many nested stacks on it. So that is something which is very handy and you should really use this. So that will allow you to reuse a lot of things. So how do you use nested stack? So this is an example where you can create a DynamoDB table. Let's say AWS DynamoDB table, properties table name is equal to service. Then you are saying attribute definition is equal to so and so, attribute name is key, attribute type is S. Key schema is key, attribute name is key, the key type is hash, read capacity unit, write capacity units. And then what you're saying, now whenever you are creating this DynamoDB table, please create one EC2 instance also. But we are not going to repeat everything for the EC2 instance over here. So we are just saying, please use this template using CloudFormation stack element, nested stack. So this is a mechanism by which you say this is a nested stack, and you specify the file which is inside S3, and you can pass the parameters to that template. And then you can say deletion policies retain. Remember that when you actually use this one, then this complete template, outer template, is going to be new one. And when you delete this template, or let's say delete this stack, then you don't want your, let's say in case if you don't want these resources to be deleted, then you should always say deletion policy is equal to retain. Otherwise, what will happen? Those resources will also be deleted. So that is something which you should be aware with working with CloudFormation stacks. All right. So these are some of the key elements of CloudFormation. Then there is also called stack sets. So stack set is nothing but it enables you to create, update, delete stack across multiple accounts with a single operation. So what you can do, you can basically say, I want to recreate this VPC across, let's say 10 AWS accounts. So this is like very common case. What happens when you work with like multiple customers? Every customer will have a VPC. Every customer will will have a same set of configuration. So wherever basically I'm doing, let's say some implementation for some of the customers, I have seen the common pattern emerging. So instead of all doing this manually, what I can do, I can basically create some common templates, and I can go to one account, which is an AWS account that is called admin account. So admin account is nothing but the logical name which I'm giving to any AWS account. And then I can hit to, let's say, various target accounts. And I can create this by just from one single, kind of a master kind of account. So this is very handy when you're working with multiple accounts, whether you're working in multiple regions. Otherwise, you have to go in each region, at least upload the template, create the stack, create the resources, and so on. So this is going to save that time. That's a stack set. So obviously you can delete stack, update stack, and so on. All right. So another thing is that something known as bootstrapping. So we will just understand this kind of feature. We will not go into much details. It is quite involved in terms of syntax. So if you look at this one particular template, what this template does, there are many sections here. So parameters we understand now, and you can also specify some validations like min length, max length, allowed pattern. And mapping is something which is used internally by, let's say, EC2. So for example, in each region, you will have different AMI IDs. And if you want to really reuse the same template across all the regions, then there has to be some mechanism to choose the AMI ID appropriately. So this is basically a mapping. It's simply put, it's kind of map. So you can query on US East 1, and within US East 1, I'm interested in HVM64 AMI. So that is something which is used internally here. If I just scroll down, see if you look at this, it says instance type T2 micro, image IDs function find in map. This is the mapping, and I want to use there is one more element which will reference AWS region. This is going to automatically provide the actual region name. So this is going to say AP-South1 for Mumbai region. AP-South1 is passed, and then I'm saying give me the HVM64 value for AP South1. So it is going to pick up from this particular mapping. It will go to AP South1. It is going to come here and it is going to extract this value. So that is the function of mappings. Then I'm creating resources. Then it has got various other elements. You can also have metadata section. Now metadata is something which is very handy when you want to kind of do some kind of setup on the EC2. So this is basically a very something as CloudFormation init. That's a tag, and it is very syntax heavy. So I will just explain what it is doing. Don't focus on how it is doing. So we just specify the CloudFormation init, and then I'm saying this is my configuration set. And what I should do, I should basically use configure sample app. So it will come here, configure sample app. In configure sample app, I'm saying these are the packages. So I want to install Yum. I want to use HTTPD using Yum. You can also say I want to install, let's say, MySQL, something like that. So to really look up the documentation of what are the supported values and so on. So something like that. Then it is going to set up MySQL also. Then after that, files. So where www.html index.html. So it is going to create one content. It is using function join. So what function join does? Basically joins these two elements. So there is one image source element, and then there is one more h1. Congratulations, you are successfully launched, and so on. Then since it is kind of working Linux, so you can also put some kind of group mode owner permission. Then afterwards, it is going to say services. What it should do, it should basically enable HTTPD, ensure it is running. So all those kind of specifics you need to refer to the documentation and find out. Then you say that's it. So that is the way you kind of configure. And also there is a provision of actually concept of user data. So this is the metadata. So the metadata is there, and then there is something called user data. In the user data, you can basically just say yum update. So it basically does some updates. It installs the files and packages from the metadata. So whatever the packages are there in the metadata, it is going to. So it is going to say use this and use this config set all. and then just do all the things installation. Signal the status is that is complete, and just wait for wait for 5 minutes. So that's basically the way you create this CloudFormation template and upload the content or the create your setup or installation. So you can extend this to installing your application also. You can connect to your maybe GitHub and so on. So that is up to you how you want to set it up. So some companies actually using maybe CI/CD pipeline directly connecting to Jenkins and so on. So that is also another mechanism. So that's basically CloudFormation. So we have seen Drift also. And stack policy, I think we have just briefly mentioned that if you want to say that I don't want to delete or update some of the resources. Say for example, you are creating the stack, but you want to say that once the stack is created, I want to prevent any updates. So you can create stack policy, and you can say that I want to effect. You can specify what is allowed and what is denied. So I'm saying deny action update to anyone who is trying to update the production database. So because remember that stack is working with stack is very easy, but it is disastrous if you don't do it properly. If somebody deletes the stack and if deletes the database, then database is also gone, and then there will be some serious repercussions of it. So you can control what is allowed. You can also control on specific instance. You can control to specific resource and so on. That's called stack policy. Change set, I think we have seen. So that's basically about the stack. So there are various kind of functions which are intrinsic functions which are already available, like function, get AZs, reference, and so on. All right, so I'm going to delete my stack, which is running in my US North Virginia region. And if I want to delete my stack, then I will have to just go to CloudFormation and delete the resources. So I go to CloudFormation. This is my stack, and I say delete. So delete initiated. So if you look at this, it is basically deleting everything. It is going to delete VPC. It is going to delete my EC2 instance and clean up my resources. All right, so my delete is complete. And that's it. So my VPC is not there. And if I go to my, let's say, EC2, this instance is terminated. All right. So any questions on this CloudFormation? Okay. So I think let's proceed further. I'm just going to stop my sharing for a minute. All right, so let's proceed further. Meanwhile, there is a question from Soumya. Is any path consideration as template URL? Yeah, we have to upload it to S3 and then you have to put S3 path because it is running inside AWS. So you have to use S3 for that. Okay. So I think someone sent me an email regarding I think one issue that is trying to work with SNS. We will see that later. This is Nishant, right? Nishant, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I will respond that later. I think we will discuss that because what is happening in your case that you're sending a message to SNS topic and immediately before that you are doing subscribe. So when you do subscribe, only the subscription request is goes to an email. So, and the request is sent and you have to really subscribe to that email, then only you can publish. But when you run everything together, then before you subscribe, the publish message is sent, and that is why the message is not going.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Fine. So
Because
let's look at.
because once subscribe it, I am able to send a message to the topic, and the message will get to the respective email ID.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So I will just share that. I'm just sharing my screen. So what is happening? This is just one important. This Nishant has actually created one code to send message via SNS. So what is doing? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So in your code, what is happening that you are creating, you are sending, creating subscribe request to this particular ARN, which is of SNS, and the protocol is email, and you say SNS client.subscribe. Now, when you do the subscribe, then an email will be sent to that user, and then your code goes further and pushes this. But when the code executes this, the user has not subscribed. And that is why this message does not go to a user. So if you split this separately, then you should see that. So if you put some kind of delay over here for time being, then you will see that message is sent. So when we work with SNS, remember, there are three distinct things. One is that creation of the topic is one activity. So that might be happening on XYZ day. Subscription, subscribing to an SNS topic, maybe an email, that is another activity. And third is sending message. So all these things may not happen at the same time. So these are three distinct activities. So you can't really run everything at the same time over here. All right, so let's proceed further. Clear?
Yeah. So in such cases, we can add delay after subscribing and before publishing the message.
No, actually, what happens, generally we don't add delay. These are different processes altogether.
Yeah.
So you basically write code in a different function logic itself. But if you want to just do it for testing purpose, then yes, you can really put a delay and just test it. Everything is fine. Apart from code is fine. There's no issue in the code.
Okay, because it may possible that we come across such use case, right?
No, then you cannot use SNS in that case. So you have to use either ACS, something known as Amazon Simple Email Service. Because unless the user subscribes, you cannot send an email. Otherwise, I can put anybody's email. I can put your email IDs and start sending emails. So that should not happen. If you want to do kind of marketing, if you have some kind of then you should use ACS, Amazon ACS.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Aman. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. All right. So we looked at CloudFormation. So let's look at something known as Cognito now. So I'm just going to switch to presentation. So meanwhile, those guys who have not updated their email ID, please do that. So yesterday I shared one Excel sheet or a spreadsheet on Google Drive. Now, how many of you use incognito mode in browser? Do you use incognito mode or not? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. I do.
Yeah.
Yes,
So,
we have raised our hand.
Yeah. So what is the benefit of incognito mode?
So like if I'm mobile and then I would like to open a Gmail, so by default it opens a Gmail. So if I would like to open another, I would like to open login with another account, then I go to incognito and then it doesn't. It will allow me to log in.
Yeah. So basically, incognito mode had its own benefits. People use it for a number of reasons. So incognito, what is the meaning of incognito and cognito? So incognito means like hiding your identity. And cognito is revealing your identity. So AWS Cognito, let's take a quick look at Cognito. So the opposite of incognito, for an identity to be known and it's no longer concealed. So that is what this Cognito service in AWS. Now, if you come across a scenario that you want to build an application where you want to do some kind of authentication. So what you typically do, in fact, even I have done many companies, this happens. Like every project, especially in the service companies, every project will build their own identity mechanism. So they will create user table, they will create groups table, they will have password, they will have forgot password functionality, they send OTP and so on. And some smart guys actually try to reuse the framework which are available in the market. So they minimize the coding time. So everything is done so as to reduce the coding time and complexities and also provide the features at minimum cost. So you need some by which you can speed up the code. So considering all those things, AWS has provided one service which is called Cognito, which is called Amazon Cognito. So it provides service for authentication. So you can use federated authentication. What is federation? Federation is nothing but like a group of entities, and they are basically they are federated because they want to trust each other for some reasons. So everybody is like nowadays that a lot of companies or a lot of applications, they say that authenticate using Gmail, Amazon, Microsoft. So this is an example of a federated identity. So this application is trusting Google to give it for authentication. And then Cognito comes. Then for authentication, you want to use in established identity providers like Google, Amazon, or maybe Twitter. Many are Facebook. And then you want to authorize, so that authorization will happen in your application. So if you have services for, if you need requirement for such kind of thing, authentication, authorization, user management, somebody should sign up. You want to create a sign up form. You accept all the details. What is the first name, last name? That is something which you can do. So it's all about user management. So don't try to create your own schemas. Just try to see whether you can really live with Cognito. You have verifying user email functionality, phone functionality. You want to send OTP. So in that case, Cognito is really useful. Then Cognito Sync is one of the another feature of Cognito, where it allows you to sync data across multiple devices. See, like, when you log into your mobile phone, log into a laptop, so you basically get the same data when you are actually looking at Gmail. So anyway, you are connected to the cloud endpoint, but in some cases you might want to sync across devices. So in Cognito, now there are two concepts. So we'll first understand the user pools, and we'll just show some concepts, and then look at identity pools, and we'll write one simple example how to actually use this identity pools as well. So I go to my Amazon console, AWS console. I will switch to my region, which is Mumbai region. And I go to Cognito. See, we can use IAM users, but not everybody, application users will not be IAM users, right? Because your application users will be having some, they have different requirements, so different functionality. So you will not create IAM users for each and every application user person. So there are two directories kind of things. One is called user pool directory, and there is identity pools. So if you want to just have a user directory, use user pools. If you want to provide any mechanism by which you want to allow these users to access AWS services. For example, if you are building a mobile application and you want that mobile application to be used by n number of users. So you say that I want to offer a better version of Snapchat or better version of WhatsApp. Then whenever somebody uploads an image or a photo or a video, I want that photo to be uploaded into S3 bucket. Now that is something which I want to implement. Then how to implement this? So there comes this identity pools. So in short, you should actually use identity pools whenever you want to provide access to external users to AWS services. So user pool and identity pool. So when to use? This is simply if you are basically building registration forms, if you want to do authentication, simple authentication, all that, user forgot password and all those workflows. Then you want external users here. And here you want external users to access, not only that, you want this, plus you also want to provide access to S3, access to AWS services in short. Because remember, if your application is running on a mobile app, that mobile app needs to be authenticated with AWS. So here AWS is there. Some authentication has to happen and authorization has to happen. And we have seen when we look at SDKs, we use something known as access key and secret key. And secret. Now this is something which we can embed in the application, but that is very risky. So we don't want to really use these long-term credentials. So in that case, what we do, we basically use the concept of a role. And role basically gives you something known as temporary credentials. So when you actually work with Cognito, when you use this identity pool, you also configure some role to be provided to the user, and this role has appropriate permissions or policies. So this will have all the policies and permissions. So that the user can actually use this AWS services. So identity pool should be used when you are accessing AWS services. So let's see how to actually use this. So let's look at user pools. So if you are doing this from your console, it's very simple, just a configuration. So I say manage user pools. And I can say I can create a user pool. So you can say I want to build a user pool, let's say for a MoJD AWS session app, something like that, some dummy session user pool. How do you want to create your user pool? So you can do review defaults. I will just step through settings. How do you want your end users to sign in? Whether you want users to actually allow them to use username, email or phone number. I just say email address or phone number. Then which standard attributes do you want to require? So what is happening here? We are just basically capturing all these standard attributes. So when you work with this Google authenticator, sorry, Google identification, these are the common attributes. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Manager.
So which standard attributes do you want to require? So you can say I require address, I require birth date. So let's say I'm just going to say I want email, given name, middle name, nickname, something like that. So all this information you want to really capture, and you can say you can also add custom attributes. So next, what password string do you want to require? I want eight characters, 10 characters. Do you want to allow users to sign themselves up? Yes. Or you want to restrict to only admin users to do that? So all such settings, typically in the user configuration, user workflows. Next, do you want to enable multi-factor authentication? Nowadays, I think OTP has become so common that without OTP, you can't really do any kind of transactions. If you are using Google Pay, online transfer, everybody is giving you a OTP. Then how will we be able to recover their account in case somebody forgets the password and so on? Which attributes do you want to verify? Email. And I'm saying, okay, create a role. It requires a real role so as to send SMS in case if you want to send SMS. So you get a lot of these OTPs on your phone number. So they might be using Cognito behind the scene. Or they might be simply using SNS to just send the SMS. You can also send emails. Do you want to customize your email address? So whenever somebody signs up, what is the greeting message you want to say from email address? Then what is the reply to email address? So all those typical flows. Then do you want to customize your email verification message? So this is the message which will be sent when the user registers. Your user verification code is, I say, okay, please verify that you are not bot, for example. Do you want to customize invitation message?
Hello, Ahmad.
Yes, please.
What is the Amazon SES and use Cognito before?
Amazon ACS is a simple email service.
Okay.
So it is used for emailing purpose. So let's say it basically gives an SMTP service. So you can do that. Even you can receive an email also. If you want to send bulk emails, and then you can really use that also. But you can't really push. Yeah, so it's an email service. That's it.
Okay, fine.
And that's it. To say next tab. Or I'm going to just accept all defaults. Do you want to remember your user's device? So remember, you know what amount of information we are giving to all these softwares and all these applications. They get so much insight, you know, which user devices you are using, which OS, and number of details are captured. And then you just say next step. Then there is also a mechanism whether you can customize workflow with triggers. See, for example, we have looked at Lambda. Now somebody wants to really, you know, they find this user pool is going to give you some basic functionality. But if you want to further customize it, then you can really invoke your Lambda function. So pre-sign up, pre-authentication, post-authentication. So that is something which is a flexibility of provided post-confirmation. So all those things are really there. And I'm just going to create this pool. So my user pool is created. So when you work with user pool, this is basically is going to capture all the details and so on. And if I look at my users and groups, there are no users found. So this is something which you do. And then next, as a next step, then you have to write code so as to actually interact with these APIs. So there are APIs available. So you can use this Cognito user pool and, you know, let's say create user, delete user, add user, and so on. That is something which is typically given. So that is the process. But I'm just going to show you there is a concept of hosted UI. This is just for demonstration purpose. So I'm just going to go to app clients. So there is a notion of application client here. So I'm just going to create an application client. And you need not follow, you can do it on your end and just understand this. Create application client. So I'm just saying Amod JD AWS session client. And create app client. So this is the client. And then I'm going to use this some more configuration here. So this is a Cognito user pool. So I'm going to say I'm going to use this Cognito user pool as my identity mechanism. And typically when you work with application, you will provide some kind of a callback URL. So this could be any arbitrary URL. So I'm just going to put something like www.amazon.com. Let's say aws.amazon.com. So typically this is your application URL, callback URL. Because Amazon Cognito is pool, user pool is doing something for you. So what is the sign in and sign out URL? Then there are some settings. Will not go into this. So this is primarily related to OAuth stuff and say save changes. So similar settings I have done for another kind of, you know, user pool. And let's go to that. And this is something which I configured. And what happens? There is a concept of, you know, hosted UI. So after some more configuration, it gives you something known as hosted UI. All right. So this is a hosted UI. So what happens? You know, you configure this, and I can just say launch hosted UI. See, I have done the similar configuration. Obviously, I've set up different values. But what is happening here, it is giving you a form and you can really sign up. So I can just say sign up. And when I say sign up, I can specify my email ID. Let's say this is my email ID. This is my email, my name, my phone number. Some random value here and then password. See what you know, if somebody requires a simple registration form, they can just use this hosted UI. If that works for some smaller setups, it might work, but not for a bigger enterprise. And you just say sign up. And when I say sign up, what is going to happen? It is saying we have sent a code by email to this email ID. Please confirm your account. So I'm going to confirm my account. So what I need to do, I need to go into my email box. So this is my email ID. And if you look at this, I got this particular email. Your verification code is so and so. And I'm going to put this verification code. Sorry, I lost my. Where am I? I need to close some of the windows here. So I think I've already done that. Then I have to use the verification. And I say confirm account. So as soon as this confirms, then I should be able to go back. This was actually configured to another site. So this is my site. So this could be your application. So this could be your application site where it lands. And then if I go to my user pool here, it's users and groups. So there is one more. So there are two users are actually in my system. And then I can go back to my particular screen and then I can again log in. So the sign in functionality is going to happen. And this is the way I can actually do this. So let me go back to this one.
Amod?
Yes, please.
Here I do a question. What is the hosted UI? Means when we try to create app client setting, it's screening some manner.
Yeah, this hosted UI is basically what UI which you see. That is the hosted UI because we have not written any code for it, right?
Okay, so ideally it should be your login screen of your application.
See, hosted UI is something which is ready-made provided by AWS. So this is hosted UI. That is why it is called hosted UI for us. But when you actually when you want to integrate in your application, you might actually either try to customize this or you will have a different UI screen altogether.
Okay.
And when you say sign up, see what happens now. What is happening behind the scene is that if you look at these Cognito user pool APIs. So we'll find APIs for sign up, register, then sign in. If you look at this one is an action. So okay, so if you look at this one, confirm, create user pool, create, confirm sign up. See here. So this is basically, these are all APIs. Okay. So this is just hosted UI means like this is a ready-made UI which is given by AWS, And if you're happy with that, you can actually really use it. You can map it to your domain name and so on. So the way it works is that, so this is going to give you a hosted UI. So when it is going to say, I'm going to give hosted UI. So this UI is already provided by AWS. And whatever you put all the configuration, let's say for sign up, we wanted to capture email, you want to capture phone, let's say all parameters. So what happens? This hosted UI is going to create a UI for you. And when you hit on this, let's say sign up button. So behind the scene, it is going to call Cognito SDKs, Cognito APIs, and all the information will be actually stored inside this user pool. So there is a facility by which you can customize hosted UI. You can actually put your logo, you can change some CSS and so on. So that is something which you can explore. But typically what you will do in your application, if the hosted UI, you don't want to use it, then what you can do, you can create a simple application. And let's say there is a form, same functionality, let's say register. So what you do when you say register, instead of creating all your user database and so on, you are going to create this user pool. And using that API, an entry will be made into this user pool. So this is the API which you will use of user pool. When there is a sign in request, then also the authentication logic is provided by this user pool. You have to just say sign in and pass the appropriate things. You don't have to really write the business logic. So we'll focus on writing more on consuming the Cognito pool services. If there is a forgot password, then an email has to be sent. So all that is done by behind the scene by this Cognito user pool service. So that is what the typical way of actually using this user pool.
Okay.
All right. So that's basically the way user pool works, and I can really sign in. If I just sign in, I can just sign in using this one. So ideally, once you sign in, it should land to your some page, so that page can be configured inside the user pool configuration. I'm just going to my website. It could be your application also. So if you forgot password, then also sending an email, complete that workflow of forgot password, that is something which you can customize. So it is very useful service. And that is the way AWS helps in speeding up all these, application development. So you just use this and you don't have to really build about, worry about data model and so on, because people spend a lot of time in building these things. So that's the concept of user pool. Now what we will do, we will take an example of an identity pool. And I suggest you should actually try this along with me so that you are kind of get some better idea of this identity pool. All right, so I'm going to share one link. Okay. Cognito. So okay, so we'll look at one example first and then look at another concept, federation. So just go to this particular link, which is on page 29. So using Cognito identity pools to provide access to, let's say, S3 bucket. It's a simple example. Pool. So let's go to this particular link. Just going to copy paste this one. Put it here. All right, so can you see my screen with viewing photos in Amazon S3?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So what you can do, you can in fact use any editor. I think you are more into coding rather than compared to me. So you can use any editor, you can use Eclipse also. So this is our requirement. So let's say you are hosting some bucket in Amazon S3, and this is just to illustrate the concept. So there are like albums. Let's say you decide that I don't want to keep my photos on Facebook. I don't want to keep anything on, on any other kind of third-party service. I want to build my own albums and photos sharing, something like that. Then you decide that I want to host my files inside S3 bucket. You create this S3 bucket, and then I have to give a HTML interface so that it can access the S3. So this particular example, so we are going to use S3 bucket, and then we are going to create an identity pool. So we're going to follow these instructions. So the steps is, first we create the bucket, then we create an identity pool, which is Cognito identity pool. And Cognito allows some features where you can allow authenticated access and you can also allow unauthenticated access. Or let's say unauthorized to be precise, because it is going to give you some permissions. So unauthorized and authorized access. So we are going to look at unauthorized access here, create an identity pool, then configure role permissions. So I'll explain what is CORS. So let's proceed with this. So we are going to, define a web page. So we are going to just create a copy paste and create a file. So I'm going to use Eclipse. So in fact, I have done this already. So this is the code. So if you look at this code, it is a simple HTML code. And here the script is SDK. And if you look at AWS SDK version number JS, now you have to replace this with the current SDK version number. So if you don't have this handy, then I'm going to just paste it from my Eclipse. So in this case, okay. So what you can do, you can use this particular value. If you are following this along with me, I'm going to put this in the document itself. So this is my SDK path. So what you need to do, you need to basically use this value in the code. And this is going to download this JavaScript file, JavaScript version, because we have been using Java. It is also possible to use JavaScript and other kind of programming languages. And there's a script, which is a photoviewer.js. So you can create a similar file. So I've already done this with my Eclipse. So I created this photoviewer.html and also created photoviewer.js. So that is something which I have done. And then configuring the SDK. So when you actually open this file, JS file, you have to specify certain values. You say, what is my bucket name? So in my case, I'm going to use the bucket name which I've created. So in my case, I'm going to use This is the bucket which I already created. Just ensure that you are using a bucket name which is there in S3. So that is something which I have done. And then just note this, initialize the Amazon Cognito credentials provider. So region is region. So I'm going to use AP South 1. And then it is expecting identity pool ID. Now identity pool ID will come from AWS. And then finally it says create a new service object, new AWS S3 API version 2006, parameters bucket, album bucket name. That is something which is done. And there is one utility function to create HTML. So this function is there inside get HTML template join. So we will not focus on HTML code, but our focus will be on S3. And then there is a code which is there in the JS file, which is list albums. So what it does basically, it uses S3.list objects. It provides some delimiter, and it says that okay, there was an error. In case there is an error, it is going to throw an error message. Otherwise, it is going to do some parsing. It is going to show the list of albums, and it is going to just give us an HTML. So there is a return get HTML function here, and the get HTML function is returned subsequently. And then it is basically doing all these kind of HTML work. If you want to view an album, it has to go to S3 and it has to say list objects. So it is going to show all the albums. And if you just go further, then it is going to it is going to list all the albums and so on. So it is going to give you a button. So when you click on a button, it is going to invoke this list of albums and so on. So list albums is a function which is written over there. So it is going to list all the objects here. So it is going to go inside the S3 and give you all the buckets. So the way it is going to do is that we are going to create an S3 bucket. So I already created that. And then I'm going to create albums. Let's say album 1, album 2, album 3, and so on. And then there will be some photos here. And the way the code is written, whenever if you're trying this, just ensure that whenever you're uploading the file into S3, let's say image file, just have the underscore, because that is something I think which is required in the code. So all the files should have the first character as underscore. So that's the way it works. So that is the first part, creating the bucket, and secondly, obviously writing the code. And the next is so that is the kind of creating this code. And next, so I have to go to my Cognito and create the identity pool. So create the bucket. So I have already created a bucket. So what I did, I basically went into S3. I'll just go to S3. I will also try this once again, just for people who are following it. So I'm going to create a bucket, let's say, and I'm just going to say www2.amod.jd. This bucket is created over here. I say click on next. Oh, sorry, there is some. Click on next. Next. I say unlock public access. I want to basically allow public access. I'm just going to uncheck this. And I acknowledge that the current settings may result in the bucket and objects becoming within public. That's fine. I'm going to say click on next. Create bucket. So this bucket is created. And then what next? And then I'm going to just create some folders inside this bucket. So I'm just going to, I can also copy from here. So I just created some folders here. So I'm just going to take this one from my other bucket. As actions. And I can just copy to www. This is my bucket. Choose. So I've done that. So if I go back to my another bucket, so all the files, and there are some files inside album and so on. Okay. And these files are actually having some naming convention starting with underscore. That's the way the code is. The next step is create identity pool. So in the Cognito console, I'm going to go inside the Cognito and going to create an identity pool. Go inside my Cognito. So manage identity pools. Say create new identity pool. So I already created one earlier, but let me create one more. So this is my identity pool. I say temp amod jd2. And then remember this, I want to enable unauthenticated identity also. Because anybody should be able to view my photo viewer. That is my requirement. So I say enable access to unauthenticated identities. Then create pool. So it is creating some resources behind the scene for us. And also you have to identify the IAM roles to use with your new identity pool. See, the role is very important. So this is called assuming the role. So if I just go back, so what is going to happen? Any external user is going to come to our web, kind of that particular, let's say URL, or when they are going to interact with identity pool, the identity pool is going to return a role to your application. Okay. And then it is going to give you, sorry, it is going to basically give you all the kind of permissions which are assigned in this role. So whatever you assign in that role, only that is accessible. And mind you that this is something which we are going to do on internet. So give the permissions carefully. So I'm just going to go to my identity pool. So I'll view details. So it is going to create a new roles. So if I just scroll down, it will have two roles. One is called for authenticated users in case if you want to also allow authentication. And then it is going to have unauthenticated identities would like to access cognito. So you're going to create two roles. So it is going to create roles as cognito underscore temp, amount2, amount jd2, auth role, unauth role. And I'm going to say allow. And when you do this, then you get some kind of identifier. So what happens? This is something which you need to configure in your application code. So this gives you identity pool ID, and this is the region. So I'm just going to grab these details and use it for my reference. So this is the identity pool ID. So once you get this, then you have to ensure that you are giving permissions to role appropriately, because we want this user to access our S3 bucket. So I have to check the role. Is that role really configured correctly or not? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to check my IAM role. So I'll go to IAM. So you'll see that now how these services are integrating. So we are using one way at IAM, we are using one way S3, we are using cognito, we are using roles. So there are many roles here. I'm just going to search on maybe JD. Yeah, this is the role. I want to check unauth role. So I need to give appropriate permissions. So if you look at my permissions, currently it does not have any permissions to access S3. So I'm just going to, just for timing, I'm just going to attach S3 full access. Typically you should restrict it to only specific bucket. I can just say that attach policy. So this role is having access to S3 policy, and trust relationship is basically trusted by cognito. So this can be kind of assumed by cognito. This cannot be assumed by EC2. This cannot be assumed by Lambda, because that is what trust relationship says. Now, having done that, then next step is to modify our code. So we have configured role permissions. Yeah, before that, I think we need to configure our one more setting. So if I look at this particular, it is called CORS. It is called cross origin resource sharing. See, because if you have hosted your bucket, if you have put some files in S3, now which domain can actually access that? So let's say you want to access files hosted on somebody else's domain, that you can access by going through their domain. You can go to their site and access it, but you can't just include that file. You can't just try to access that file directly from your application. So if you want to share the file across any domain, so that is something as cross origin resource sharing. So I'm just going to set this CORS policy or CORS configuration. So you just copy this. It says allowed origin star, anybody can use it, because I'm going to test this through my local client. I'm going to use my local browser. Allowed method get, allowed method head, allowed header star. So in spite we have given S3 full access, because of CORS, it is not going to allow put access. It is not going to allow put or post methods, because that CORS is going to prevent that. So this is one more kind of permission feature. I'm just going to copy this, and if I go to my S3 bucket, so let me go to my S3 bucket, ww2, and I'm going to go to permissions tab and set CORS configuration. CORS configuration is by default is blank. So I'm just going to paste it and click on save. So once you click on save, then we have pretty much done with our steps, because I already created one bucket and folders, create albums and upload photos. So that is something which I did already, and I already defined my web page. And then I should basically just go to my browser and see whether I can see my album or not. But before doing that, ensure that if you are doing this along with me, in your code, in your JS file, ensure that you put the appropriate bucket name here. And this is something which you should use your identity pool. And the region has to be APs-south1, whatever you are using. So once you do that, then let me go to my, let's say, browser, and let me invoke this. So I'm just going to invoke this through my browser. So I'll go to file system, and this is where this is in my workshop project. And this is my file. I'm just going to open this in browser. So I'm connected to my earlier bucket here. So what it is doing, it is in fact it has connected to S3, and it is using the role permissions, and it is showing all the albums. If I say album 1, then it is showing all the files which are there in the album. So obviously I have not modified much CSS and so on, so it doesn't really look good, but that's okay. So these are all the files over there. Back to albums. Album 2 is blank. Album 3 is blank. So I can just upload anything in the file, then that file will be visible over there. So this is the way you can really use this identity pool and user pool. I don't know whether there is anyone trying along with me right now. So if you just proceed further along with another example over there, you can also configure, you can write complete full-fledged application. So let's say you want to really allow people to actually create album, upload of photos and so on. Then you can really look at same, you can continue further. The logic is same. So only thing is that now your permission needs to be appropriately modified so that people can actually put object, upload object, delete object, and so on. So you have to modify at the role level, and you also have to modify at the course level. So even course, cross origin access should also allow all these methods: post, get, put, delete, and so on. Now, once you do that, then obviously there is another HTML and code, corresponding code. So it's very simple that when you upload a file, it basically creates a put object request to S3. And that's it. So if I want to just run that also from my machine, so it's not it's a very crude UI, but at least it explains the functionality. So I want to create new album. You can create new album, enter album name. So album 5. So OK. Successfully created album. I can choose a file. So choose file. Let's say I'm going to upload one file. So this is my file, and I say add a photo. Successfully uploaded photo, and you can see that photo over here. So this is the file which I was showing when you actually look at import export of CloudFormation. Same file. And that's it. I will go to back to albums. So this is the way you can interact with S3. So what is happening is that you are using Cognito to get appropriate permissions. All right. So I think we will take a short break now, and then we will resume and we'll look at one more concept of Cognito, which is called Web Identity Federation. So we'll just understand in principle how it works. So we're not going to write any code because it takes time to actually set up everything. And then we will proceed with some other topics. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. And we will start the session at 16:20. Meanwhile, if there are any questions, I will hang around for 5 minutes. All right, then I will see you at 16:20 then. Yeah, I think let's start. All right, so let's begin further. Let's proceed further.
Yep.
All right, so let's look at one more scenario with Cognito. Now, this is something which is called authenticating using public provider IDPs. So IDP is nothing but the identity provider. So there are many IDPs. So one is called Google, Amazon, Facebook. So what you can do, let's say you want to really give an authentication mechanism if you don't want to build anything. So if you want to build an authentication mechanism, we have seen a user pool concept, which you can create your custom user pool and build your authentication logic. But now it is almost becoming kind of well accepted practice to actually utilize well-known identity providers. So instead of you building logic, you can just rely on Amazon, Google. And if somebody is going to log in using that, then you want to allow them access to AWS resources. So if you are doing this, then this is called Web Identity Federation. So the way it works is that now, so there are like a series of steps. So first is let's talk about AWS side. So in the AWS, you have created some resources. Let's say you created DynamoDB. And you created DynamoDB and you want user to actually, whenever they upload, do anything in the application, you want to update, let's say DynamoDB. So one example could be game application. So people are playing games on their mobile phone. And then you need to really that application should update the current status or whatever related to game, what is the latest score and so on into DynamoDB. So that is something which you need to access. And the way it works is that in that case, we are going to use something known as Cognito. So you have to develop an application and that application has to be configured with corresponding IDP provider. So let's say you want to integrate with Google. So what you need to do, you need to go to Google Developer Console and create an application there. It will give an application ID and something known as secret ID. You take that application ID and secret ID and go inside the Cognito and configure that. So this is the configuration step. So if I just want to write it on my whiteboard, so there are a series of steps. It is very configuration heavy. So what you do as a developer, you build an application. Okay. So building an application is anyways kind of independent activity. So after building an application, you register your application. And it's a register application so that you will get something known as application ID and something known as secret ID. And this is you are basically doing with corresponding provider. So if you're using Google, So to go to Google, if you're doing with Amazon, you will go do it with Amazon and Facebook and so on. Then what you need to do, you need to come to AWS and create an identity pool. And when you actually create an identity pool, you can say that I'm going to use specific Google IDP. And here you also specify this application and secret ID. So this is something, these two configurations you have to do. So what is going to happen? We are telling AWS identity pool, okay, you can actually allow Google authentication only if the users are actually coming through this application ID and secret ID. So only through an application ID, something like that. That is the meaning of it. And then once it is done, then what happens when the application basically provide an authentication screen? So in that case, the application is going to show login with Google. It will give you like some social logins, Google, Amazon. They're going to give an option. So you say that I want to log in with Google. So when the application provides you, the user is going to put his username and password. Username and password. And the way it works is that, let's go back to this presentation. So when the user starts using the application is going to redirect for authentication and receive an ID token. So it is going to get an ID token from this particular provider. And then this ID token will be passed to Cognito to get something known as Cognito token. So it is going to exchange that ID token for Cognito token. See, because this ID token is not understood by AWS, so you cannot really do much. So it has to basically give something related to AWS. So it is going to give a Cognito token. And then using that Cognito token, you are going to ask for temporary security credentials, so which is called STS. So it is going to talk to STS. And once you get this temporary security credentials, then your application should use those temporary AWS credentials. So temporary AWS credentials get access key, temporary access key, secret key, and the session token, plus it is valid only for some duration. Using that, it is going to access the DynamoDB. So this is the flow of this. And this is something which you need to code. So there are two sides. One is on the developer side, that is on this side, IDP side, and the other is AWS side. So once it is configured, then that's it. So you have to just start using it in the application. So it is very simple. So let me repeat. So step one is that you develop an application and then go to this IDP provider. So let's something like Google developer login and so on. So I'm not sure whether I can log in right now. So if you are registered within a Gmail and everything, so you anyway have access to this. And you create something known as so you need to check there is some change in the UI. But this is where something you need to really go to this and then set up appropriate application. So I'll check, so there basically you need to go to a very specific console. So even Amazon has Amazon Developer Console. So you can log in with your email ID and then you will go inside the console. So once that is done, then the second configuration is done inside the Cognito, which is in the identity pool. So there are some identity pools are already created. So let me see if I can show you that. Yeah, and if you look at this particular section, something known as authentication providers. So let's say you want to integrate with, let's say, Cognito. So it is also possible to do authentication through Cognito. Also possible through Google. So basically, it will ask you to provide something on a Google client ID. So if you go to Facebook, Facebook will have its own kind of ID and so on. So this is something which is valid only if the request is coming from that ID. And what Cognito does, so whatever that integration is required, whatever communication is required with this Facebook or Google APIs, that is all managed by Cognito for you. So that is the way it basically works. And just to see this in action, so there is something known as Google Playground, sorry, Amazon Web Identity Federation Playground. So let's illustrate that with the same. Okay, so I'm just going to go to this link. So this is one example, which is like a demo created by AWS. So what happens in this case? Now this is something which is going to really set the entire flow. So imagine that this is your application, and in fact somebody decides to log in with Google. So this is something which is there. So I'm going to sign in with Google. So you can also go to this particular URL from the browser, and then I say Google sign in. And it is going to ask me, okay, I want to sign. I'm going to say I'm going to sign with, let's say, this particular ID. So what has happened? I am successfully logged in. And if you look at this response, so you get some one token which is called bearer token, and there is an ID token. And it basically scope is profile. So whatever information related to what my email ID and so on, that will be visible. And this is something, it's ID token. So once it gets ID token, what is the next step? So this is authentication step with third-party provider. You say obtain temporary security credentials. This is step 2. So what is going to happen? This step will be invoked. So in this case, there is one API. So this Cognito provides one API which is called call assume role with web identity. So when you call assume role with web identity, all these kind of a thing, you can basically pass the web identity token which you received. So if you look at this one, so this is starting with E here, EY, something like that. And if I just scroll up, then this is my token. So I take this token, and then this call assume role with identity, and I put some session name. What I'm doing, I'm basically talking to Cognito now. Say call assume role with web identity. And once you do this, then you get a response. So it basically interacts with sts.amazon.aws.com. It gets a response it says that access key ID is so and so, secret access key and so, session token so and so. So everything is done so as to get these credentials securely. Now this is not the end of it. Now what your application need to do, your application need to access the appropriate resources. So if you want to access DynamoDB, so you have to write code, and you can use this access key and secret key to authenticate and authorize. And then you can just say proceed further. So using those secret key and access key and whatever the information is there, you just say I want to list bucket. Now this is something which is implemented in one AWS account. So when you say action list bucket, it is going to, let's say, click on go. So it is going to hit the AWS service and it is going to give you all the bucket list. So this is now this has actually integrated with kind of AWS. So you are getting the data from the AWS. So even if you follow the same process, then in that case you can basically write your code in similar manner. So the steps are same. So you have to give the access policy appropriately. So this is, I think, having only S3 related permission. And if you look at this, it is going to, and if you look at this, it basically is going to allow some resources, which is like S3 Web Identity Federation Playground. That is the S3 bucket, which is there. It is allowing get object and list bucket. That's it. No other methods are actually allowed. So this is the typical flow when you actually work with Cognito. And this is something which you can code in your application. So this is something which is very commonly asked question if you are planning or appeared for any of the AWS exams, especially developer exams. Then this particular flow is really checked. Any questions on this and on the approach? I know that this unless you basically try this out, this may not be kind of digested because it has series of steps. I'm just stopping my screen for a minute. So this is Cognito is something which you can really leverage if you are planning to use that. So you need to understand the use cases. So use case is very simple. If you have third-party application, third-party IDPs want to really access any AWS services, use identity pool. For simply registration and everything, use user pool, and you can combine user pool and identity pool also. So currently we saw how to integrate various steps for integrating with third social providers. All right, so I think let's proceed further.
Amod, here I do have one question regarding Cognito.
Yes, please.
Is Cognito help us to have means kind of Google login, a Facebook login with one go, or we do we need to do some other setting for the same in Cognito?
Yes, you can actually use other logins like Google login, Amazon login. You can use those in
So
application.
it is the same process which saw while going through the Cognito, or we Google SDK or the Facebook SDK we need to integrate along with the AWS Cognito.
No, basically when you work with Cognito, see, one way is to use Cognito. That is the simpler way. So you can also integrate Google sign in, Amazon sign in without using Cognito also. But for that you need to really understand how to integrate with those APIs. So all that kind of plumbing work which is done by Cognito, for exchanging those tokens and so on. So that all you need to do. And for that you don't have to really use any kind of if you're using Cognito, it is much simpler. So you have to just rely with AWS SDKs. As far as you are considered, your job is to just create that developer API or console. You have to basically just register your application inside that corresponding provider.
Okay.
So the only thing is that it's a bit kind of configuration heavy. So to get it right for the first time, you might spend a lot of time if you are very new to this entire concept. But otherwise, once you do it, then I think it's just a matter of doing this again and again.
That's right.
So generally, a lot of these JavaScript-based applications, these nowadays they use this mechanism. All right. So let's look at one service which is called Route 53. All right. So if I go back to our labs, see, we have actually created a lot many resources. And if you look at our AWS estate now, it has got many services, many elements. We have created load balancer and so on. So this is not shown over here, but we have created load balancer and it is pointing to multiple servers. So we created auto scaling group, we created simple instance and added to the load balancer. Now this Route 53 is a service which allows you to, it's a domain name service. So if you understand domain name service, I think you understand Route 53. Now why it is called Route 53? Why not Route 54, Route 57? The reason being, the Route 53 or the routing DNS service actually works on port 53. So that is what Route 53 name says. And the way to use Route 53 is very simple. So let's say we have created our load balancer and so on. So in our infrastructure, we have this load balancer. So when we looked at load balancer, it gave some DNS endpoint. So some very long string ending with, let's say, AWS, Amazon.com, whatever it is. So if I go to my Route 53, sorry, not Route 53, ELB. I don't have any running instances, but I'm going to start my public instance. So this is my public instance. I'm just going to start it. And if I look at my load balancer, meanwhile, load balancer is having a DNS name. So it is called DNS name for a purpose, reason, domain name, service name. And this is a DNS name, which is a record. This is my domain name. But this is something which is not really useful because I want to really use my custom domain name. So it is taking, it is now, it is up and running. But what I want to do, so whatever is like this domain name is there. So I take this and let's say I want to really map this to some kind of a, so I want to map it to a domain name, which is my custom domain name. So that is something which you can do using Route 53. What I can do, I can basically go to my Route 53. And then I can create a record, which is a DNS record. Go to Route 53 and I can create a DNS record. So if you need to be owner of the domain so that you can modify your domain record. So I am basically having a couple of domains. So one of my domain is for testing purpose. So that is called. So this is my domain name and info. So what I want to do, so whenever I say JD demo, I should be able to create something like subdomain. And then I should be able to point it to this particular load balancer. And this is one function of this Route 53. Second function is if you want to own a domain name, let's say you want to own domain. So you can go to various DNS providers. These are called DNS registrars. And you can actually go and say, I want to have a domain. So I can just go, let's say I want to buy a domain with, let's say, my name. So amod.info. So this is like in the registering a domain name. So this is second service which Route 53 provide. Then again, if you want to transfer your domain from, let's say, GoDaddy or let's say another kind of provider, then also Route 53 is useful. And the third major function is doing health check. So when your application is running, if I want to understand what is the uptime of my application, so what you need some service which is going to ping or go to your website or web application and hit your URL at defined frequency. So for that also I can use Route 53. So these are actually three main functions of Route 53. So what I can do, I can now, this is something which you cannot do in your configuration because you don't have some records at this DNS level. So I am going to create something on my Route 53. And this is the service also which is delivered via Edge. And this is the only service which gives you 100% SLA. Now remember that SLA is a very important kind of thing. So that is something which decides what should be your architecture. So we'll shortly cover some of the best practices of architecture and look at some of the DR kind of thing practices also. So this is my hosted zone is nothing but the DNS record. So they always change this UI every time I come here. Some new UI is there. So I am currently having one domain name. So I will go inside my domain name. And let's say I want to create a record. So there are many records here. So if I want to create a record, So I'm basically using simple routing. So if you look at the simple routing, I just want to point to, let's say, my load balancer. I can also point it to my EC2 also. I say next. And I say create records. So they changed significantly this one. So let's say I want to, now the way I have set up my domain, I have to use specific format. So I have to use, let's say JD, CM workshop, cloudmanthan.info. I have to choose an IP address. So I can choose an IP address also. So if my instance is running, let's say, so go to my EC2. So I will grab the EC2 IP address. So I need to have a public IP of EC2. So this is my instance. I'm going to get the public IP 159. I will go to my, and I say I want to point it to this IP. So my expectation is that when I basically go to this JD CM workshop cloudmanthan.info, it should take me to that particular IP address. And if I go to that particular IP address, what do I have? So I have basically the same page. So what I will do, I will basically look at my domain name now. So this is my domain name. So I'm just going to copy this and let's see whether it works or not. So I can just verify through command line. So I say ns lookup. So if you know this DNS propagation, depending on how it is configured, it may take some time. So that is one of the purpose of this Route 53. So I have not created it. All right, so now the record is created. Let's see whether it works or not. So if you look at this now, this has a resolved to actually my IP address. Now this is very quick because this cmworkshop.cloudmanthan.info is something which is configured, and this all the information related to my domain name is kind of propagated. If I just go to this one, see this. It will take some time from browser. I think I need to refresh my cache, but if I come here, I just basically get this one. I'll just try to do curl. So you get the idea. That's the way it basically works. So we'll come back after some time. So we should be able to see that through browser also. So that is one function of this Route 53. Now another function of this Route 53 is that there are various routing policies. So we'll understand a couple of policies. So if you look up our kind of architecture. So let's say I want to have 100% SLA, or I want to have 100% uptime, which is very impossible to achieve. But still, looking at cloud and the way it works, you can really architect so that there is very minimal downtime. So let's say I have configured my domain name so as to point it to, I can configure it to load balancer also, I can configure it to EC2. But just to keep the matter simple, let's say I configured it to point it to EC2. So what is happening, let's say I basically configured this jd.cloudmanthan.info. It is now, let's say it is pointing to an EC2 instance. So this is my current setup. Now, if this instance goes down, then my application will be down. And then I want to basically achieve something known as failover. Then what I can do, I can set up one more EC2 instance. So I'm just working with a single EC2 instance here. I can set up one more EC2 instance. And I can say that this is going to be my primary site. This is going to be my primary. And EC2 is going to be my failover or secondary. This is another EC2 node, failover or secondary. So once you configure this, let's say this is what you do in the DNS records. So we are going to, so just now we have created one record over there. So I'm going to say jd.cloudmantra.info is going to point it to this one. And I'm going to create one more record and I'm going to mark that as a secondary. So this will be marked as secondary. And then what happens, we have to configure something known as health checks. So health check will actually go to this EC2 instance and check whether this EC2 instance is up and running. As long as it is kind of down, then whenever somebody types this in the browser, then automatically the request will actually will be routed to all this new EC2 instance, which is secondary. So when this fails, when this is down, gone, completely gone, this one, then all the requests will be actually routed to the secondary. So this is called failing over. And this is something which you can achieve using Route 53. So that this is called Route 53 failover routing. So the one example is called simple routing. You just point it to one EC2. But in case that is the issue is that if that EC2 is down, then your application will be down. So if you want to failover, you have to do this failover. Now, Route 53 is only for the routing purpose, but you need to have EC2 instance running as well. So this is called one of the disaster recovery strategy. So this is called disaster recovery strategy, one strategy. So this is called domain-based failover, domain-based routing. Now this is something which is very essential when you are working with, let's say, high uptime requirement. If you don't have a high uptime requirement, well, then you can live with some downtime. But this is typically done for ensuring high resilience. So this is called failover. Then there are some other features, which is another called latency based routing. So latency is what? Let's say you have latency based. Let's say you are doing this latency based now. So assume that you have two EC2 instances. One is here, another is here. And whenever somebody types this jd.something.com, then this user is here, let's say in Mumbai. Now to which server it should send? Or if a user is in another country, to which server it should send? Now what happens when you do a latency based routing? Now it basically is doing a lot of health checks. This Route 53 is doing a lot of health checks, so it gets a lot of data. So it basically has some latency information. So it will say it takes like 1 millisecond, takes 2 milliseconds, this takes 4 milliseconds, takes 5 milliseconds, and so on. So on an average, this EC2 is taking longer. So what it is going to do? So all the requests it is going to come to, when somebody type jd.something.com, then all the requests will be routed to the server which is providing you lowest latency. So the request will be all routed over here. This user will also go to the same EC2 instance or the same kind of endpoint, which is kind of configured in the Route 53. So this is called latency based routing. So it provides you various routing algorithms, which is happening at the DNS level. And that is one. And there are a couple of more, but I will just talk about one more, which is called weighted routing. So in case of weighted routing, what happens? Let's say you have two EC2 instances. So when you talk about this weighted failover, you need to always have at least two endpoints. In our example, two EC2 instances. So what we are saying, somebody types, let's say jd.something.com. And in this case, what I want to say, please route 90% of the traffic to this EC2 instance and put 10% traffic to this EC2 instance, or vice versa. So you are assigning some weights to a particular endpoint. And this is very handy. So what could be the use case for this weighted routing? Any idea? No, I think failover is pretty clear. Simple is also pretty clear. So what could be the use case for using weighted routing?
If different EC2s are of different capacity, like CPU and processing power and everything.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So I think that is also could be one valid reason. What about other reasons? See, the other reason is that, let's say you are basically providing two releases, or let's say typically you want to really do this feature testing, whether this new feature, how it is going to be perceived by users. So obviously you will do a lot of testing and so on. You will create user groups. Some users will test the application functionality. They will say, okay, look, this new feature looks great, but there's no feedback like real feedback from real users who are going to be actually consumers of that particular application. So in that case, what you can do, let's say you have these two EC2 servers. So this is my release one. It is basically working fine. No issue in the release per se, but I'm going to add one more feature in this release 1.1. Now we want to really test, you have to do some random testing and get some feedback. You build some kind of an analytics mechanism, built-in mechanism in the application. And you can say, what you can do in that case, oh, fine, I'm going to start with, this should have 99% request should go here, 1% should go here. Then what is going to happen if there are 100 requests coming, the 99 requests will go to R1 and another will go to this 1.1. And then you can see analytics information and understand the behavior. If it works, then what do? You basically change the setting. So you are okay with it now. So what you do? Now I want to basically say I want to reduce this. I will say now make it 90%. And this is 10%. And if you see that 10% users are happy and you are more confident, then you can go on saying after some time you will say 50. This will become 50. So all the requests basically are distributed equally. So this is like, this is very handy in those cases. It's called weighted routing. So all those things can be configured using Route 53. So just understand as a concept, because most of the time this will be done by somebody else to you, because domain level changes are not typically done very often. And you can configure your Route 53 to various services, various elements. So like load balancer, I'll just go to my console. Let's see whether it's propagated or not. It is still not. So it has picked up from my NS lookup because it has. So it is pointing to the correct IP address. So something has broken again. So there is one more, like you can configure this Route 53 with various services. So if you look at, let's say I want to create a record set, let's say create a record. So there are many other routing policies also. We'll not go into each and every one. So if you look at this one, you can actually point it to, say, AP South. You can also use this to point it to, various records. Like you can point it to Route 53. You can point it to API gateway. You can point it to ALB. You can point it to your Elastic Beanstalk domain name, and so on. So you can point it to many elements. So for example, I may hide some existing records. So you can also point it to kind of, this is CloudFront and so on. So there are many such records here. So even you can point it to S3 bucket also. So this is one record which is pointing to S3 bucket. So that's all basically about this Route 53. Health checks is another feature. You can actually really put a health check. So if you want to really put a health check for any particular site, you can just create a health check record. You can say create a health check. So I want to understand the availability of, let's say, AWS.amazon.com. So this is the site. What I can do, I can just come here and put a site endpoint name, AWS, and then domain name. I'll check. And you said domain name is going to be aws.amazon.com. It could be your custom domain name also, because you want to really get notified something is down. That's it. Next, create an alarm. So if you want to alarm, you can send an alarm. Create health check. So what is going to happen is that, so this is going to actually start health checkers. See, Route 53 is available globally, and it is going to initiate health checkers. And look at this. What is going to happen? It is going to start health checkers across the globe. Asia, Tokyo, Singapore, Ireland. So all health checkers are what they're doing. They're hitting your aws.amazon.com, and they're trying to get some information out of it. Okay, and it got some successful responses. Look at this. And if I know this, do this update, then after some time, this should become status should become kind of healthy or green. And you can also get a lot of data from this one. So this is very handy. So if you look at this one, it is now healthy. Now these health checkers actually have really hit from all across the globe, and as you know, you will get a lot of data. You can view last field check and so on. So this is very handy when you want to really do health checks for your application also. So the application hosted on some site, then you can do that. It is also possible to do health checks for your internal applications which are running inside the VPC, but you need to have some kind of configuration over there. So that is the kind of purpose of health check. I'm just going to delete this health check. So if you look at this particular infrastructure, so you have everything in the AWS so that you can really start from scratch, nothing on the plate. Then you go inside the AWS console, then you create IAM users, then you set up VPCs, then you typically set up instances, public instances, private instances. Then you have a routing setup, network access control list, all these things are configured. Then you connect to your EC2 instance, set up an application. If you want load balancing, then you set up load balancer over here. Then load balancer will forward the traffic to a EC2 instance. Then you have auto scaling setup. And then you can configure this using Route 53. You can configure your domain name so as to point to your application. So this is primarily on the server side. So even we have looked at databases and so on. So this is a server-based infrastructure. Similarly, if you are going with serverless, you can use your typically S3. Then you have this API gateway, and then you have Lambda function, and then you have DynamoDB and so on. So it's kind of that's the way for serverless. Typically, you should think about going for serverless if possible. So I'm just stopping my screen sharing for a minute. So we'll also look at some monitoring aspects, which is called CloudWatch. So once you have this application and everything is set up, how do you really start configuring monitoring? Now you may or may not be responsible for actually setting up your application for monitoring purpose and so on. But that is something which we need to understand. We'll just understand that. I'm resharing my screen. Before we proceed further, let me actually give you a walkthrough. We are not going to set this up because it will take a couple of hours, but I suggest you should actually try this on your own. So I'll also paste this link inside the document. So these are like a couple of examples of typically how serverless is used. Now it is possible to create completely serverless application. So what you do, your application is hosted inside the Amazon S3. So I know like one application, many applications are there in fact, which are using serverless, but you can really host your website in Amazon S3. So in my AWS account, so what I have done, I have set up one endpoint as S3 website. See, whatever example which you have seen for accessing S3 bucket using kind of incognito, it also can be run from the S3 bucket itself. I'm just going to look at this particular bucket. So in S3, there is a property called static website hosting. And if I go to this particular site link, this site is hosted in bucket. This is just a demonstration. You can really make this completely JavaScript, CSS based. You can, interact with S3. You can interact with Cognito and so on. You can make it really, feature rich. So this site is hosted in S3, and this is something which I configure. How I configured. It's very simple, straightforward. So what I've done is that I basically uploaded some files. So there is basically index.html. And there are some folders, images and videos. So whatever images you are seeing, those are coming from this folder. And you go to this permissions tab and you ensure that you block all public access is turned off. That is point number one. Secondly, you have to give bucket policy so that anyone can access your bucket. So this is the bucket policy. Effect is allow principal star get object, and this is my the bucket name. And finally, I have set up my website endpoint. I have basically enabled that static website hosting. And then you basically just say index.html and upload the error.html. And you will get an endpoint. And this endpoint you can use. When I click on this one, this comes to this particular link. So you can host your videos. You can basically put all the things over there. So that is something which is very handy. Now following the same process. So what happens, like this is one example where it is hosted inside S3. If you want to do registration authentication, then we have seen you can use Amazon Cognito user pools. So our application has to be coded for that. The other mechanism is like you can also use Amazon API gateway. You can use Lambda, and finally you will use something known as DynamoDB. So without using any server-based components, you can really achieve a lot of functionality, because for serverless we have basically have Lambda. So whatever you want to do in the compute, so you can really do with using AWS Lambda. So this is one architecture. So you can really go through that. And there is one more example. This is something which is very it will take around like 2.5 hours, something like that, or more than that, depending on how you so again you can look at this also as an example. And there is one more. Okay, it should really so this is actually an application architecture. Now this is something which using additional elements. So it uses Kinesis, etc. So you can use Kinesis data streams. Kinesis is something which we have not looked at, but ultimately you will see Lambda, storage, DynamoDB, and all those things are really used. So in fact, there is one more. This is so I suggest you basically go through these kind of examples, and you can really try that out on your own. So if you look at this particular site, wildwriters.com, this is completely coming from S3. I'm going to paste this here. I'll put it at an appropriate place, but I'm just for reference, I'll just put it here right now. So this is completely hosted inside S3. And this is something which is, you can just sign it up. And so this is like, just hypothetical. You can, if you want to go for a ride, then you can just invoke this, ask this unicorn rather than invoking Ola or Uber. So that's the whole concept they have implemented. This is a very dummy site, so you can just go through that. So this basically is coming from completely S3, wildwriters.com, and you can basically sign up and so on. So all the functionality is there. So behind the scene it uses Lambda and so on. So it's a very interesting site. So everything is hosted inside S3 here. So I will share all these links in the document as well.
About but on S3 we supposed to host a static site. Okay, so sign in, sign up. Does it belong to the static or dynamic?
No, you can basically, when you say sign up, you are basically you will be interacting with Cognito. So I will share the links. Yes, please.
Yeah, so means we are using totally different service.
Different service meaning?
Cognito.
Yes, Cognito, yes. You can interact with Cognito, right? So see, we have looked at how to use this S3 bucket from using Cognito.
Yeah, right.
Similarly, you can actually set up authenticated access also. It's possible.
Okay.
So typically what happens in the application, you basically have some kind of sign up link. And then you basically create this registration inside the Cognito user pool and so on. I think you have to really do it, then it will be flow will be very clear. So let's look at this CloudWatch. Now this is CloudWatch. It's a monitoring service, as the name suggests. And whenever we look at our AWS estate, whenever you see monitoring tab, that is nothing but our CloudWatch. So it's a system-wide monitoring tool. And if you are really working with AWS, then you should be familiar with CloudWatch. So what happens? All the resources, S3, EC2, they are going to send a lot of metrics, CPU utilization. Let's say how many buckets are there, how many objects are there, what is the size of my bucket, what is my CPU utilization over last 2 weeks. Then if like my RDS is working properly or not. So all that information you can actually get it from the CloudWatch. And whenever you see monitoring tab, that is nothing but the CloudWatch. So what happens in the CloudWatch? Your basically resources that use CloudWatch, they send data. And CloudWatch is going to give you facility by which you can look up into its information, such as what has been the CPU utilization and so on. And if everything works fine, then you can leave as is. Otherwise, you can also set something known as alert or alarm. So in the CloudWatch parlance, it is called alarm. And you can set up CloudWatch alarm and you can send an SNS email notification. So typically, if the server is down, yes, I want notification. If somebody logs in into my AWS console, I want notification. If my RDS is failed to take backup, I want notification. So all those things can be actually really configured using CloudWatch. And this CloudWatch can be also used as a trigger point to trigger my auto scaling kind of activities. So we have seen when we looked at auto scaling, then auto scaling basically requires some kind of trigger, and we have seen scheduled action. So we scheduled an action and then we said I want to add additional instance, or I want to really remove the existing instance and so on. So that is something which we have done. And the CloudWatch really works along with auto scaling. And then you can look at the statistics and so on. So that is one kind of important feature of monitoring. And there are many features like one is called dashboard. So you can create a custom dashboard. So if you want to really get a consolidated view, so what is happening if you go to CloudWatch? Let's go to CloudWatch now. See, if you look at the way AWS UI is kind of constructed, every service has its own kind of monitoring tool, monitoring features, monitoring tab. But if you want to get a consolidated view, you cannot get anything from here. So you have to go to CloudWatch. So if you go to CloudWatch, now this is CloudWatch home, and you will see all the resources. Generally, you will see all the resources which we are used. So it is going to show all the resources, and it is showing you EC2 status. How many are which service in alarm, which are in OK, the recent alarms. Now in my kind of environment, a lot of things are kind of configured, and some are resources deleted. So it is not really in a great state. But in your case, or everybody wants this to be in kind of okay state. You can also look at various, let's say CloudWatch. I can also look at my application LB. And I can see that I am getting some information. So I'm getting a request count. So you will see that I'm having two load balancers here. So one is called application load balancer request count. The other one is another load balancer. And you can see some information about that. You can see information about active connections. You can see HTTP 500. You can get kind of significant amount of information through this. And you can also look at specific services. If you don't want to look at application load balancer, I want to look at, let's say, EC2. So even by coming to this screen, I will understand, okay, there are a lot many instances are running. I have to do something about it. And then you can also correlate. For example, if you want to really understand if the CPU utilization is really high, then if you see all the other elements are also showing you the same information. So all the other graphs are also showing at the same time what is happening. So this is very handy information if you want to really use it. But the word of caution is that if you are really in the monitoring role, don't rely purely on the CloudWatch. Your life will become like hell, because though it looks good, but it is like too much of data, and it is very kind of, it is not really user friendly in terms of when you want to do it, really dig deep. So I suggest you use third-party tools. And those third-party tools, generally what they do, they look at this CloudWatch information, logs and everything, and then they will give you a nice usable interface so that you can really find out some information. So you might want to really find out simple information. Give me all the instances which are basically having CPU utilization more than 50% in last 12 hours. Then you can get that information. It's not like that you cannot get it, but you have to do a bit of plumbing work. You have to basically dig deep to understand how to utilize those and so on. So that is something which you can really use. So dashboards, alarms, logs. So I think when we looked at Lambda, we saw that the logs are actually getting inside these log groups. So there are like many log groups created in my account, and each log group has something known as retention policy. You can also filter on these log groups. So there are some more features in the log group. So when you are actually inside this monitoring kind of role, then you have to really focus more on the CloudWatch, not on the other aspects. Then events is something you must know, and you should actually start really exploring this more. So what is an event? So CloudWatch events is now becoming Amazon Event Bridge. So after some time, they will call it as Event Bridge. So this basically, just they keep on changing a lot of things. The event is something which is very interesting. So whatever is happening in the AWS estate, you can listen to many events. If anyone logs into my AWS account, then I get a notification. If some instance is kind of deleted, I want notification. So this is a very powerful mechanism. And this is like event-based computing. You can really do a lot of these security automation, and a lot of things are done over here. So what happens in this case? You say service name, I want to really look at, let's say, console login. If anybody logs in, this is the detail type. What is the target? And I can say I want to send an SMS. I want to send SNS topic. I want to add a target as a Lambda function. I can also use Lambda function. Sorry, I want to change this Lambda function. And if you look at this, these are all various kind of targets. So I can invoke a Lambda function. If somebody starts an instance of bigger size, there might be your monitor. This is going to trigger an event saying that somebody has started an EC2 instance. So I'm just going to go to EC2. And if I want to say EC2 instance state change notification, whether you want to really get notified only for specific states or for specific instance. And then you can look at this, then you can really do some more action with Lambda function and so on. It is very handy, and you can really schedule certain tasks. So you can also, if you want to run kind of batch jobs, think about using CloudWatch event rule and then trigger your Lambda function. Don't try to set up your application on AWS EC2. Rather, you focus on how you can leverage Lambda function. If the batch job is not taking longer, then you can really leverage Lambda function very well. Otherwise, you have to really ensure that you design your Lambda function so that it can restart from anywhere it has left. So this is a very handy feature. So I recommend that you actually explore this more and start using as much as possible, because this is like, you can listen to many events and you can really can completely, create an automation out of it. So that's basically, it has got many features, primarily they are building a lot of features for getting into insights. How do you get more insights from the CloudWatch? But nothing matches the third-party tools like Datadog or New Relic. So those tools are really kind of feature-rich in terms of usability and so on. So that is something which you should start exploring. All right. So let's look at, we'll just understand at high level what are other some services are there. So we will look at one service briefly. We'll just understand what its function and what it does, and when to use it. So one is called Elastic Cache. Don't launch instances. This is very expensive. Now, Elastic Cache is a web service that makes it easier to launch, manage, and scale a distributed in-memory cache in the cloud. So this is all primarily, provided for improving the latency of the application. So let's say we have built an application like this, very simple application, our register application, and you are currently not using any kind of caching. But if you want to use caching at the application level, let's say, just imagine that you are an application where the database queries are taking long, and there is a common pattern that some common queries are always resulting the same data every time. So I'm going to say all right. So I'm going to say I want to introduce some kind of caching, and why caching is required? Obviously, to improve the perceived performance to the user. So you want to really improve the actual performance. Then you have to really look at Elastic Cache. So Elastic Cache is something which typically sits in between your application and the database. So caching is very simple concept. I think I don't have to talk much about that. So if you find that there's a lot of static data and a lot of computationally expensive operations, then you can think about caching the data. And the way it works is that, see, as far as AWS is concerned, it is just going to give a caching engine. But what AWS Elastic Cache is a distributed cache. So what does it mean? So let's say you have an application, and the application is running on one EC2 instance. And you are using, let's say there are popular caching engines. One is called Memcached, and second is Redis. So let's say you are using Redis. You're using Redis engineer, and your request is actually coming to this particular EC2 instance, and there is a database behind the scene. So what you do, you basically say that fine, I want to basically go to your application goes to first database, and then it let's say populates the cache. So it is going to say put this data into the cache. So obviously it has to check first the data is in the cache or not. Assume that you are initializing the cache, the request comes, request goes here, then the data is put there. Next, the request comes, it is going to go to this cache. Is data is there? Yes, return from here. So this could be one flow. If the data is not there, it has to go to the database and then populate the cache again. Now this is the model of caching. So this improves the performance because the most performance sensitive is basically IO. So as long as you are reducing the IO or removing all the bottlenecks related to IO, then you can drastically improve the performance. So in this case, this is fine. This is working fine. But now you realize that after even working or having this model, my application is not scaling. So typically what you do, you're going to add one more instance. So you're going to create the replica of this. So you'll create one more. And then you will introduce one more Redis cache. And then you will have something known as load balancer here. And then you can basically data or request gets routed to appropriate instances. Now you can really use something on a session affinity. We'll just ignore the session affinity for the example. So what is going to happen? Let's say this now new request comes. So it goes to this particular instance. It caches the data over here. Now the next time the request comes, let's say the request will actually go to this instance. And it doesn't find that data in the cache. So it is going to go to database and put data back in the Redis cache. So now this data is there in the Redis cache over here, but it is not available on this EC2 instance. So that is something, it's a bit of challenge here. So it is not going to crash the application, but it is not going to serve the purpose. And if you have like many nodes like this in EC2, then every EC2 will have its own Redis copy. Now that is something which is not desirable. So in that case, what is used is called distributed cache. So what is going to happen? Instead of each instance having this Redis, so what is going to happen? It will have only single distributed cache. So there is a distributed cache. And you will get an endpoint to an Elasticache cluster. So as far as application is considered, so there might be internally, they might be managing, but as far as end user is considered, so instead of using this on EC2, I'm going to use this endpoint. Instead of this, I'm going to use this endpoint. So all this will be actually pointing to distributed cache. So what is going to happen, even if the requests are routed to any of the nodes on EC2, we'll always have the same truth about the data. It is not going to happen that this cache earlier was having one data, this was not having. This distributed cache will ensure that you have the data which you want, irrespective of from which EC2 instance the request comes. So this is the function of Elastic Cache. And there are two engines provided. One is called Redis and second is Memcached. Redis provides its own interface how to actually integrate with it. So there are some Java libraries you can use so that you can put your data into the Redis cache. Now this is application's responsibility to put the data into the cache and read the data from the cache. So that is the function of Elastic Cache service. As long as you know this, there is not much in terms of configuration and so on. So this is something your application architecture will decide which engine you want to use and so on. So if you are basically using Drupal, CMS, Drupal uses Memcached, and this is the typical architecture of Drupal. How this Drupal architecture is set up on AWS. Now this is one example. This is something I think you should be able to read this very fairly easily and explain to someone what it's doing. So if you look at this particular kind of diagram, now we have also like similar structure. So we have AWS, we have Route 53 we just saw. We have not looked at CloudFront per se, but we have this VPC structure, Internet Gateway. We have this concept of public servers, which are also called Bastion or Jumpbox. The NAT gateway is something which is used so as to allow traffic from the private instances to the outside world. Then there are application load balancer, auto scaling group, and here if you look at this Drupal, the way it is configured over here, it is running on EC2, it is running on Apache, it is configured on auto scaling, and then it is using Aurora database, which is a MySQL version, could be Postgres also, and then it is going Elastic Cache. So it is using Memcached because Drupal supports Memcached. So this is the Elastic Cache endpoint. So depending on your which framework you are using, you might have to use these particular elements. And this uses Amazon EFS because Drupal keeps all the shared data on this Amazon EFS. Now this is your kind of classic kind of setup. Now with whatever understanding or whatever examples we are seeing, you should be able to draw such diagrams, propose such solution, as well as implement to certain extent. So this is the function of Elastic Cache. Now next look at some other services. See, there is something on Neptune, which is, I think we talked about that graph database. So if you want to build something like social network, let's say you have an idea which you want to compete against Facebook, then you want some database, then you can use Neptune database. Redshift is for the data warehousing. QLDB is for quantum ledgers and something like that. DocumentDB is MongoDB compatible, and Keyspaces is Cassandra. So what Amazon is doing, Amazon is saying, okay, don't go away from AWS. We will give all the things which are required to you. And then we have something known as developer tools. Now, as a typically most of the mature companies, like those companies who are in the business for a pretty long period, they generally don't use these developer tools because you're already using IntelliJ IDEA, you already have your CI/CD pipeline set up. But not everyone on the planet is actually having that. So you can basically use built-in IDE, something like Cloud9 IDE, which is like built-in. So whatever you see in the Lambda console, that is nothing but the Cloud9 IDE. So that is a Cloud9 IDE for writing debugging code. CodeStar basically just you can create complete code commit complete project. So when you create a project in the CodeStar, it creates code commit. A code commit is nothing but the simply put, which is Git in AWS. Not much. So if I go to code commit, you can create a repository. You can create a repository and put all the files over here. But this everything is nothing but Git. So if you are familiar with Git, you know how to use this code commit. So only thing it is all integrated with services. Then we have something known as code pipeline. Now, code pipeline is similar to your Jenkins. So this code pipeline. So you can really set up this code pipeline so that whenever you are uploading any code, it can actually create appropriate resources. Okay. And the code build is your kind of build tool. So it's basically kind of Jenkins kind of thing. And then code deploy. So code deploy is used for installing the software across instances. Now this is something which you might use. And what is code deploy? Let's say if you want to have, let's say installation on 100 EC2 instances. If I say that just install this Tomcat on 100 EC2 instances, how are you going to do that? You're not going to do that manually. In that case, you can use code deploy. And Cloud9, I think we discussed X-ray is something which you can analyze and debug your applications. And this is very handy when you are actually working with Lambda functions. So if you go to like Lambda, look at my Lambda function. Then let's say I want to look at this particular Lambda function. And you will see there is an X-ray. So as the X-ray says, what is the purpose of X-ray? To actually scan, go inside. So if I look at my view traces in X-ray, so you can see, you know what is happening inside Lambda. So Lambda is talking to database. So currently there are no traces here. But what happens is that you can, okay, so I think let me see last 1 hour. Last. So you can go to custom time. Let's say I will go back to, let's say, last week maybe. Start time. So basically, I'll just show you from the X-ray example. So if you want to understand, what is happening and how much request is taking time, if Lambda is connecting to database, how much time it is spending and so on. So what happens when you actually look at X-ray, you will get something like this. You will get some information about how the client actually is invoked, which Lambda function got invoked, and so on. Also, you get some timing information. See here. So this is something which is possible to actually get from X-ray. So when you are working with Lambda, you should actually enable X-ray. And then this function is going to, it says that my function duration is 3.2 second here. It has taken 2.3 seconds. Initialization took 69 millisecond. Invocation 2.1 millisecond. S3. So S3 has actually taken 1.7 second and so on. So we'll get some insight into how that request is actually getting processed, and you can understand the bottleneck. And in case if you want to really improve, then you can really modify your code if possible to improve and so on. So that is the function of this X-ray. And if you want to really instrument that, you have to really instrument that using Java code. So you have to enable those X-ray instrumentation. So if you look at this one, so in short, you have to basically, it's not something out of the box in the code. So you have to use this X-ray APIs and start putting over there. So that is something which you can use along with Lambda. And if you want to really use, if you want to invoke Lambda functions in sequence, let's say if you want to build something on a workflow, then also you can set up something on a step functions. So if you can use step functions so as to create a series of flows. Say for example, if somebody says that I want to go on leave, or then that has to be approved by, let's say, your immediate supervisor, then it has to go to his boss and so on. So if you want to build that kind of workflow, then you can use step functions as well. And that is really very handy. So there are kind of many such kind of services. And by this time you must have realized that it's very big platform. And depending on your use case, you have to really start exploring that further. But whatever we have covered so far, so from the infrastructure point of view, EC2, VPC, and from the serverless point of view, I think that is typically good enough for many of us to actually get going and build further on that. Then obviously you need to dive deep because there are not many configurations are possible. And if you are working on analytics, then you might want to look at some of the analytics related services. And if you are into this machine learning space, look at this, many services. So there's a lot to actually explore, lot to learn, and there are some end user computing services which we hardly use for workspaces. Workspace is nothing but your desktop in the cloud. Workdocs is similar to your Google Docs. If you're working with IoT, you can use IoT devices and so on. Media services, if you want to do live streaming, if you want to really convert the video files so as to match the appropriate format and so on. That is something which you can look at those services. So it's a pretty big platform, and so a lot of people are actually interested in doing certifications also. Certification is good because it will allow you to actually go in a structured manner, study topic in a structured manner. It is not something mandatory, but it is always good to have certification. And if you want to do any certification, I'll quickly talk about AWS certification paths. All right, so now the certification, number of certifications are going to grow because what is happening, there are a lot many services are getting added. So if anyone wants to become certification, now everybody comes from the development and technical background. So it is pretty obvious if you look at the name. So this is like a black one, which is called cloud practitioner, which is called foundational. It expects 6 months of fundamental AWS cloud and industry knowledge. So whatever we have studied, you should actually appear straight away to this cloud practitioner, and then you can clear this exam. It's fairly simple exam. For technical people, it shouldn't be a problem. And then if you are having some experience working on AWS, then depending on your role, depending on your track. Yes, please, any question? So depending on your track, you might actually decide to go with either architect, operations, or developer. So which one looks to be easiest exam to you? Just as a, you might be already familiar with the exams. Which one is the easiest one here? What do you think?
Practitioner.
Yes, practitioner is given. Yes, it is easiest. Next. What do you think?
Maybe developer.
Developer?
Yes.
No, developer is not the easiest one. So I will tell you the way, if you are really planning, if you are somebody serious about this. So next exam you should take is the solutions architect associate. The reason being that is easiest compared to other exams. Now it might be surprising because people do not become solutions architect on day one. But with the solutions architect, what is the benefit is that you don't really need to have a lot of hands-on experience. If you are a general IT person and if you know if your concepts are pretty good, then you can correlate. And if you have like whatever we have learned so far, plus you need to really understand some more services from the solutioning point of view, like Redshift and so on, Kinesis. If you understand when to use which service, what are some of the pros and cons, can you really design an architecture? Do you understand costing? Then this is something which you can follow. And then the next one, you should take a developer. If you are in a development role, you should take a developer. Developer will actually really test your understanding on various services like API gateway, then DynamoDB streams, DynamoDB not streams, DynamoDB per se, SQS, SNS, Lambda, Elasticache a little bit, Cloud Formation they may ask, but primarily all developer oriented services, like programming against SDKs. Then you should take the SysOps if you are into SysOps or DevOps role. SysOps is actually of the toughest of the associate certification because you need to really have hands-on experience because there will be all scenario-based questions. And let's say something is not working, you should be able to fix it, or at least you should be able to understand what is the reason. Luckily, as of now, all questions are objective. is no real test which happens in the AWS environment. So you can take your chance. There is no negative markings. And then if you are like take an associate, you can take a professional. Now it is not mandatory to actually, I think, have some kind of, you need to check the documentation, but this solution architect professional is the toughest of the lot. And DevOps engineer is very hybrid. It is between sysops and developer. So if you have done developer, think about sysops, and if you have done sysops, then go for DevOps. And then there are specialty exams. If you are into networking field, focus on networking. Security, focus on security. Machine learning, Alexa, database, data analytics, and so on. So a lot many, and there are going to be more. So I believe there will be some IoT based also will be coming up. I'm not sure, but they go on adding the exams. And what is the cost of these exams? Professional is $300, associate $150, foundation I think $100. All specialty cost you $300. So these exams are comparatively expensive compared to Microsoft Azure platform. Secondly, what is the duration? I think I suggest you check the documentation, but I think for professional exams it is up to 3 hours. It's a 3 hours exam. The only challenge with the professional exam is that after like 10 minutes, after like 1 hour, you get exhausted because the question itself is so long, and the answer again is again lengthy. Then after some time you feel that this question was asked earlier, and all questions actually feels like those are all similar. So professional is like is going to really test your skills. I think the number of questions will be around 65 or 75, something like that. And the passing criteria is nowadays it's 720, I think. So you need to get 72% passing marks, and you will come to know immediately that whether you passed or failed. And associate, they are I think around what's the duration? 65 questions, 130 minutes. So it is much simpler. And specialties again 3 hours, $300, and you can explore what is coming soon. So there are no beta exams. So beta exams generally they give a discount. 50% of the discount is given. And if you want to really look at developer kind of sample, what is the scope? And each exam has, I think I can navigate from here itself. So each exam has its own kind of syllabus, not syllabus per se, at least what is the topic they cover. So AWS services, APIs, CLI, SDKs, application lifecycle management, understand shared responsibility model. CI/CD pipeline you might have to learn only for exam. And then you can download the exam guide from here. And you can also download the sample questions from here. Download the exam guide. And this might get changed, because this is like C01. For other exams, they have actually updated the exam. So if you look at the modules, so they're going to test your deployment on 22%, security 26%, development 30%, refactoring 10%. So it's like it's a bit vague. Actually, they should actually made it more kind of it's a bit abstract. I don't know why they're not making it more crystal clear. So initially, like these exams started in 2013. So at that time there was hardly any material available for preparing for exams. But nowadays, there are loads of material available. So the cracking these exams is much easier now. And then you can look at some sample questions also. And you will see some sample questions here. So you will see what is the mechanism and so on. So these are all scenario based questions. So to just go through that. So there are a lot of questions on Cognito. You will see Cognito references. So the best way to actually look at this, the one you can just basically search on all the kind of services, make a list of all the services, and just learn. Or there are a lot of online materials available, online tutorials, online lectures, and so on. So people are taking those. So if you have like Pluralsight subscription, Cloud Guru subscription, you can take those also. All right. So that's basically it's all about various things. And if you have any questions, meanwhile, so we can discuss.
So, Amod sir, shall I stop recording now?
Yes, you can.
Okay.